So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to another installment of the Careers in Green Chemistry seminar series, part of the Center for Integrated Catalysis. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Jana Dailey, who is currently a patent attorney at the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research, where she focuses on the management of research and development related to liver disease, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Jana has over 10 years of experience in patent prosecution and litigation, as well as a patent agent. She got her JD from Suffolk Law School, and she got her PhD in chemistry and biochemistry from UC San Diego, working with Professor Seth Cohen on metalloenzyme inhibitors. She then pursued a postdoctoral fellowship in therapeutic discovery, working with Professor Craig Lindsley and Dr. Dennis Hallahan at Vanderbilt University. So she has been quite busy, but without further ado, Jana, we are very excited to hear about your journey. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the introduction, and yeah, happy to share my career story with you guys today. So, as mentioned, I'm now a patent attorney, and so in order to get there, I started with my BA at Lawrence University. It's a small private liberal arts school in Appleton, Wisconsin. While there, I was part of what we called the Bomb Squad, which was a chemistry outreach show. So it was fun to share our love of science with students in elementary schools mostly. They would come onto campus and we'd put on a little show. My quote-unquote study abroad program was at Oak Ridge National Laboratories, which is just in Tennessee, so not really that far abroad, but it gave me experience doing research in a national lab, so a little bit different environment. Also, as an undergraduate, I had 2 summers of research at the University of Minnesota in Professor John Luigi Veglia's lab, so that was working with some membrane proteins and trying to find some NMR structures of those. So it was growing lots of E. coli, overexpressing some protein, and then trying to get some samples ready for NMR. I got to present some of my research on that at various ACS conferences. And so, you know, that just kind of fueled my love of science and my desire to go into scientific research and go on to grad school. And that, again, was at UCSD with Professor Seth Cohen. There I did declare as a biochem originally, so I could do the rotations in the various labs. So I got to try out 4 different labs before picking Seth's lab, but it was also a great way to try to get an idea of what life is like day to day in the various labs, and then kind of go for what I thought was going to be a good fit. And so I guess my little cartoon here, this was from the Oak Ridge Science semester. We were trying to see if we could identify protein complex distances and interactions with the model protein of hemoglobin and using commercially available crosslinkers and then analyzing those by mass spec. The UCSD research focused on trying to find inhibitors for matrix metalloproteinases, MMPs. And so this is one of our model complexes with the zinc, which is mimicking the catalytic active site of MMPs with 3 histidines. And then this was some of the molecules I was working on had sulfur and oxygen, and these various heterocycles bound to metals very well. And so we also applied some of these heterocycles to other applications, including whether or not they would work for lead chelation. So I got a fellowship on that, and then also overexpressed some proteins because my advisor thought it might be a great idea if we could co-crystallize a protein with, you know, the inhibitors we made. Didn't quite get that successfully completed before I finished, but it was a wide-ranging research project, and I learned a lot in his lab. And then, as mentioned, I did do my JD at Suffolk University Law School. They had a part-time evening program, so that was a 4-year program while I was working at law firms. So other research experience beyond the undergrad, as mentioned, I did my postdoc at Vanderbilt University. It was part of this integrative training and therapeutic discovery program that the NIH put together. And so, you know, kind of a cartoon of what we were doing is we'd come up with a hit, do a library design to make various combinations of the pieces for an inhibitor, say for, I guess our target was AKT, a kinase. So we do a lot of microwave-assisted organic synthesis, set up the machine, let it run, mass-directed HPLC purification by some of the technicians in the labs. Then we do the biological assay screening and then try to make modifications based on the assay results iteratively. And again, there was kind of wide-ranging. So the original project I was working on was focused on trying to develop radiation sensitizers. So these kinase inhibitors that might then also sensitize cancer cells specifically to radiation treatment. Not quite successful in that, but we did some other, again, parallel projects. So there was a total synthesis of ciliatamides to see whether or not they would inhibit and treat malaria, and some PLD inhibitors in some of the other labs that were there at Vanderbilt. So the Lindsley lab was really focused on organic synthesis of all sorts of molecules using this sort of platform to help iteratively synthesize all these molecules. And then after Vanderbilt, it was around 2008, the recession. So I was at Vanderbilt. I was applying for an additional fellowship from the American Cancer Society, which was awarded to me. But while I was also at Vanderbilt, I presented up in Boston at the American Association for Cancer Research conference, and I met up with one of my friends, former lab mates, David Puerta, who was working at Living Proof at the time. And he basically invited me in for an interview, which I wasn't really expecting. He was like, "Can you send me your resume?" I was like, "Okay." And then he's like, "Can you give a talk?" I was like, "Okay." So long and short of it, when I got back, I did receive an offer from Living Proof, and I asked my advisor, Professor Lindsley, whether or not he thought it would be a good idea to take the offer or to continue with the fellowship. And so I took a calculated risk. I took the Living Proof job. It was a very small company at the time. It was about 27 employees when I started. I think they were at close to 50 when I left about 3.5 years later. And while there, they actually take a biotech approach to beauty. So kind of a little bit different than the traditional pharma companies, but I was, synthesizing molecules, and what I was synthesizing were actually dye molecules. And so this is one of the granted patents from my work at Living Proof. And this particular dye molecule stayed a lot longer than the other traditional dyes that were out there on the market. So being a small company, I obviously had experience as a scientist making all these dyes. And then as we came up with some leads, it was transitioning to some project management. How do we work with CROs? Where are we running our toxicity studies? Can we actually use this and test this on people? We didn't get very far with the testing on the people, except for my boss, David. He did dye his hair red. It worked very well. And it did add value to the company when they were finally acquired by Unilever several years later. And then also, because I was the main scientist on this project and David was more like supporting and managing the various hair projects, I also helped work with outside counsel to look at some of the references they came up with and draft a patent application. And so these different roles, I was like, well, do I want to keep being at the bench? I wasn't sure that was really the way I wanted to go. The project management, I found a little bit frustrating. And so I thought I would try IP, intellectual property. So I talked to our consultant, who was kind of like our part-time in-house IP counsel. Since he had been doing it for many years, he set up some informational interviews for me, and one of them turned into a job interview, which was really great. So then I started my legal experience in 2012. So the first firm I started at was Hamilton, Brooks, Smith & Reynolds, PC. It was a boutique patent firm here in the Boston area. So it's actually in Concord, Massachusetts, Lexington and Concord, American Revolution, all that kind of good stuff. And I did mostly patent prosecution and some litigation support at HBSR. It was really great experience. They were really good about training people. Unfortunately, while I was there, I didn't have as much chemistry work as I would have liked to have. My training and background is chemistry, so that would have been my bread and butter. But the projects the work really wasn't being, delegated as much, and so I ended up helping support some software applications and some bio stuff, and then obviously this litigation. So there was a big case for Millipore versus W.L. Gore, and it had to do with a particular device and certain ways of processing biological samples. So I did some support work for that, got to sit in on some depositions, which is something most very junior people don't get to do. So it was a great experience, but to get more chemistry experience, I then did move to Lathrop & Gage, LLP, now they're GPM. And so this was a general practice firm that's actually based in Kansas City, Missouri, but their Boston office was chemistry patent prosecution with some was also some biology patent prosecution. So the lawyers who were in the Boston office were out of another boutique intellectual property firm in Boston. So I got a lot more experience there with chemistry patent prosecution and support, doing some due diligence. But again, since it was Kansas City, Missouri based, I felt like there wasn't necessarily as much opportunity for advancement, not being at the home office, kind of being out of sight, out of mind. So I transitioned to Foley Hoag, and I was there for about 4 years. So they're a general practice firm based in Boston. At the firm, I managed multiple patent families and a blockbuster drug portfolio for one of our big clients. So that was really exciting to see what all is happening. You know, what do you do on a day-to-day to kind of try to manage getting the patents, which is kind of your job as the patent prosecutor, but also how do you develop that strategy when you know these patents will be in litigation later on and that they're worth millions, if not billions of dollars. So I think the blockbuster drug, it was something ridiculous like $30 million per day, something like that. So that's kind of that experience. And while I was at all these firms, I was going to law school part-time. Like I said, it was a 4-year program, so it was at the very end of my HBSR term. I was 1 year at HBSR, 2 years at Lathrop, and then the final year at Foley, finishing up. And so it was part-time law school, and they reduced our billable hours to 1,500 hours a year, but that's still a pretty full schedule. So, but you know, I thought it was really great at Suffolk that they do have this evening program. Everyone else is working full time, and so whether or not they're already in law or hoping to get into law, and obviously not all of them are patent practitioners, but it was really great experience. Some very good classmates and colleagues out of that. And so now what I'm doing, I'm now in-house at Novartis as part of NIBR, supporting their research and development programs. So I'm providing IP support for liver disease, cancer, and cardiovascular disease projects. One of my projects is a phase 2 proof of concept clinical trial that's related to treating atrial fibrillation, so irregular heartbeat. I'm also supporting some very early stage chemical biology and therapeutics research projects. I'm also providing support for various research collaborations, including one with Berkeley for the Center for Proteomics and Chemistry Technologies, which has been very exciting. There's a lot of cool research going on in academia, and Novartis and other companies are trying to leverage that very heavily. I'm also supporting a research collaboration with Forendo Pharma that focuses on HSD17B inhibitors. That's kind of their area of expertise. And we're leveraging it for certain other disease areas that they're not as interested in. And then I'm also providing support for licensing agreements. So the sort of research collaboration licensing, I didn't have a lot of experience with in-house, or sorry, in private practice at the various firms. That's more just trying to get the patents, communicating with the various patent offices to try to get those granted. So I've been learning a lot, continuing to learn a lot. And so, you know, some of the support for the licensing agreements, I'm in charge of managing the licensing of various lipid nanoparticle technologies, for example, to Intellia for genome editing applications. And I've also been supporting various due diligence projects for in-licensing technology with and without research collaborations with various companies. So I guess my talk was pretty short, but if you guys have some questions, I'm happy to go into more detail about anything anyone wants to talk about.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was great. I guess I can get started off. I'm just curious more about the transition from working at a bench to now, I guess, working at a law firm. And what is that like overwhelming, or is it quick like turnaround for you?
I mean, I think, you know, it was only about 3.5 years at the bench and at Living Proof, but I was feeling like even at the bench and working as a scientist, eventually you're going to be promoted to being a people manager, which some people like and some people don't. And I think eventually I'll get there in my legal career too, but it was a question of, all right, do I want to keep working at the bench? Is my final goal then to try to manage people, or is it, you know, obviously I chose not to do academia where you manage people and your grad students in your labs. And so it's kind of like, I didn't think that was where my strong suit was. So I thought I would explore some of these other options, because I think that the scientific background is really important for the IP stuff, but also some of the project management, scientific writing. There are all these other careers where you don't necessarily have to be at the bench. And I love that I'm still close to the science now, working with the scientists directly.
All right, I have a question. Is it nice to not feel pressure to publish research papers anymore?
I do enjoy not having that pressure, although our scientists are very excited to share their results. And so my answer is usually, no, please don't publish that yet. Please don't share that. Wait until we filed. And then obviously we do want to share. Novartis is trying to be at the cutting edge and show that we're at the cutting edge, but it's a balance of disclosing versus disclosing and sharing versus trying to get some commercial value out of it. And I think it's one of the things that's kind of push-pull, especially with the academic collaborations with Berkeley. They're obviously pushing to publish early and often. And sometimes we have to be like, all right, that's great. Let's try to time it so that we make sure we have something on file before you publish. And I recently learned apparently there's these bio archives and chem archives where you post before it's actually published in a journal. And so that's, our collaborators posted it like 2 days after we filed their application. So it's great to share, but yeah, there's got to be some balance, at least from my perspective.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question as well.
Sure.
I was listening in. I had to jump over because I'm also in lab, but I was listening in and going through your legal experience. Once you decided to kind of go into that route of IP and management and like kind of that role off the bench, what do you recommend for, I guess, because it looked like you went straight into like, all right, we're gonna go to these law firms, we're gonna get this experience, and you had like a nice beeline right in there. What would you suggest, I guess, for people who are kind of interested in this but aren't really sure like if this is where they want to go? Like, do law firms, do they offer internships for these kinds of things?
So they don't usually offer internships, but when I started at the law firms, I actually didn't have my JD, right? So I just had my PhD. It was the scientific experience. So I was hired as, they're called various things, but it's usually a technology specialist or a tech spec, or I think some of the other firms have a slightly different term for it, but it's basically you're providing some expertise, and then the next step that you can take is while you're doing that, you can study for and pass hopefully the patent bar. So that's an exam given by the USPTO. And so you just need some scientific experience. I think it's just a bachelor's degree in science. And then you're studying all of this material. It's called the Manual of Patent Examination and Procedure. You take the 6-hour-long test on the computer, you pass that, and then you have your registration number, which means then you can file on behalf of your clients with the USPTO. And so, firms look for that, especially, but, at least in Boston, they would hire us for the expertise, and they would then help pay for the patent bar, like courses to review and prepare, and then to take the test itself. I think on the West Coast, like in California, they prefer if you have the patent registration number before, but I think it really depends on the firm and if you have a connection or an in. And then at least in Boston and on the East Coast, they actually will pay for the tuition for law school as long as they're able to bill you out at the reduced hours. So they're making their money, but they realize that training is then important and helpful to them, because then they can bill you out at a higher rate. And I just found after a couple of years of doing this, like the job, at least at the firms I was working at, wasn't very much different between the patent agents, tech specs, and the actual lawyers, the low-level associates, but the pay was like, I think it's up to like 3 times as much as the tech specs make. So it was worth a little pain and effort. When I started, I was not sure. I was like, I'm not going back to school. I don't want to do law school. Let's just see what this is. But over time, I enjoyed it enough. I thought it was worth it. I didn't enjoy law school, but it did get you that pay bump. And then, you're learning other ways to think about some of the problems and issues that your clients face. So.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Oh, sure.
I guess I have one more question. If you're,
Sure.
unless anyone else has anything to interrupt me, but so looking at this slide here, so are these things that you're currently working on? So like, are you balancing all of these things at once? And
Yep.
I guess like, I guess with that, like how is it like being an in-house lawyer versus like for a specific company versus working at a law firm, I would say.
Right. So, the big things the law firms emphasize, it's a lot of billable hours. So I'm sure you've heard attorneys talk about their billable hours. And so it's kind of like trying to make enough money and work for enough clients. And so I think at the law firm at one point, it's like hundreds of matters and probably, I don't know, 50 different clients that I touched at least at the various law firms, maybe even hundreds of clients. But, that, like I said, the focus for the most part, at least if you're in the prosecution side of things in the law firm, is to try to respond to all the different office actions to try to get the patent granted. And that's kind of the focus. And, every once in a while you might help on like a diligence or something like that, but you're not really getting the whole picture. You're just getting whatever the client's telling you, which is like a small piece of like their whole perspective. And then on the litigation side at the firms, it's really about now enforcing the patent. Someone else is doing what you already covered and are protecting, and now you're trying to enforce your rights to exclude them. They owe you damages or something like that, or someone's accusing you of infringing their patent that they have. And then in-house, it's really more, again, kind of getting closer to the science. Now I'm working directly with the scientists and project teams, and they're really my clients rather than the big pharmaceutical company or the university, and trying to talk through that with them, like, what is the invention here? Are we filing now? Like, where's the project at? How much longer do we think it is going to be before we get to, drug candidate stage, testing in animals, that kind of thing. And then also this experience supporting the collaborations and the licensing agreements, which is just kind of different. So it's more bigger picture, like what's the business strategy? How am I going to impact that business strategy? How can I help the company and the project teams succeed as much as possible? And no billable hours.
That's great. The no billable hours seems pretty nice.
Yes. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have a couple of quick questions. It's
Sure.
pretty cool to see kind of your journey. A lot of it I didn't even know. But how large is the legal team at Novartis? Because it's a very important part of the drug process.
Right. So Novartis itself is about 100,000 employees worldwide. I think legal, that includes like the general legal and the IP, I think that's about 500 people. And then the intellectual property, R&D, IP kind of stuff is, I think there's about 100 of us. So it's a big chunk, but it's compared to like the size of the organization. Not as large as it could be. To give you some perspective, Hamilton Brook Smith Reynolds had about 40 lawyers, and then both Foley and I think Lathrop were about 300 lawyers for the whole firm.
So I'm kind of curious, what does a typical day look like for you as a patent attorney? Is there a lot of
in-house, there's a lot of meetings. There's a lot more meetings than I ever had at the firm, but it's trying to, since it is supporting these licensing agreements and research collaborations, it's trying to work with our deal team. So the business and development people, who've found the opportunities for us, and now we're trying to negotiate, like, are there things that we need as from an IP perspective, and how does that fit into the larger deal? What do the financials look like? Should we do this deal? Should we not do this deal? When it's very early stage due diligence, it's more like, is there something worth paying for, or is there something someone would buy from us? So it's kind of hard to say what a typical day is, but I would say, unfortunately, a lot of my time is spent in meetings, probably 30 to 40%, and then we actually do our own prosecution in-house. So I'm still doing, like, trying to respond and get patent applications granted for Novartis, and drafting those applications when it's an appropriate stage. We feel like we know the chemistry and the science best, and we have a vested interest to get those patents. So.
Awesome, thank you. Unless anyone else has any other questions, let's thank Jana for a great talk, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for
Take
coming
care.
on. We
Jana.
appreciate it.